All right, everyone. So if you have any questions at all or any comments, please feel free to throw them in the chat. And welcome back. It's been a few weeks since I have seen you all. And I hope that you are doing well. The last webinar we covered was stress awareness, stress personalities. I hope you thought about that. I hope you've implemented some of those strategies. Maybe you've gotten a little bit more insight now into how stress is showing up in particular for you. For this webinar, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the body pathway, the physical source of energy or reservoir of energy that we carry with us all the time, which is the way that we eat, the way that we move our body and exercise it, and the way that we recover our body through sleep. I'm going to give you a fair warning. Today is a little bit more didactic than the other webinars. This is where I talk the most, and I'm going to try my best to carve some time in the end for questions and comments to the best of my ability. But there's a lot of information, as you know, to cover when it comes to the way that we eat, move, and sleep. It's a lot of subjects to cover in an hour. So I'm going to do my best to cover those and to address questions at the same time. So without further ado, let's dive into our body pathway. The first thing that we're going to cover is nutrition and the way that we fuel our bodies. I would imagine that if I took a poll of the participants here, most of us would report back that we could do a better job of fueling our body with healthy foods. When we ask our clients what really gets in the way of healthy eating habits, two persistent themes emerge. One is our clients' mindset around food, which we're going to get to. And the second is their misunderstanding of how our eating habits and patterns impact our entire lives. And we're going to get to that as well. So that's really how we're going to unpack this when it comes to nutrition. Most of us have a very binary perspective. I would say most people that we poll have a very binary perspective or mindset around food. They think, is a food good or is it bad? Will it make me gain weight? Will it make me lose weight? Am I going to get fat or am I going to get skinny? That's a lot of the times how people look at food. Think about the last time you had a meal. Maybe you fall into that category of thinking, oh, I should eat this, or oh, I shouldn't eat this, or I should eat that. Because of what? Because of how it makes us look on the outside or how it might impact our physical body. A lot of us also vilify certain foods. We avoid certain foods. Maybe we avoid eating entirely because we're afraid of gaining weight. Maybe we overeat certain foods and we undereat other types of foods. Some people overeat, for example, a lot of sugary foods or processed foods. And again, that falls into a little bit of the mindset and patterns around our eating. And, the question is, why do we do this? Like I said, there's a lot of different reasons. It really comes down to mindset and misunderstanding. Sometimes people fail to plan. Sometimes they get confused as to what to actually eat because there's a lot of really bad information on the internet about food. And a lot of the diets that are out there, they conflict with each other. So it can become really quite confusing. Sometimes we tell ourselves that we don't have time to eat, or we can't afford to eat healthy. Whatever the stories are and mindsets that we have and narratives that we have around our own eating habits, there's a lot of factors. Even stress and emotional well-being play a role in our eating patterns. Here's my challenge for you in the next 10 minutes. I want you to zoom out and take a 10,000 foot view on eating and food in general. It's essential that you think about food outside of the context of that binary good versus bad. And I'm challenging you for the next 10 minutes. Think about food in the context of how it makes you feel. How much energy does it give you? And how does it impact your long-term health and well-being and your ability to show up at your best? What if you looked at food that way, as opposed to that binary kind of lens that we tend to put on when it comes to food? For example, how connected are you to your work? How energetic and how focused on a fast food lunch, or worse, no lunch at all? That's a good way to think about food is through that lens. So I'm challenging you for the next several minutes to think about food in that context with me of performance and energy and how it helps you show up at your best. I'm going to dive into a little bit of the science around food to clear up some misunderstandings that may be out there. So we're going to dive into that for a little bit and then get into some of what are some strategies that we can put into play to create better habits around our food intake. To get really, really simplified about it, everything that we eat, no matter where it comes from, whether it's a carbohydrate, a fat, or a protein, it breaks down into a fuel that your body and brain can use to get through the day. We need every macronutrient to run at our best. And when I say macronutrient, I'm referring to fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. So just to give you an example, fats are our primary source of stored energy. Fats, healthy fats, avocados, nuts, seeds, healthy oils, peanut butter, those types of things. Healthy fats are a primary source of stored energy. They also help with the creation and transport of hormones and of fatty acids, and they also help with nutrient absorption. Proteins, meats, dairy products, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, eggs, fish, those types of sources of protein, even plant-based proteins, edamame, quinoa, things like that. They're required for hormone creation and production. There's a lot more to protein than just building muscle, although that is a primary function, is to repair and build muscle tissue in the body. But did you know that proteins are also responsible for the creation and regulation of hormones in the body and the regulation of our metabolism? And then we have carbohydrates, fruits, vegetables, starchy foods, breads, pastas, rices, sodas, candies, things like that. Carbohydrates are our body's most readily available source of energy. So think of it like your checking account. That's your readily available cash. Carbohydrates are a readily available fuel source and energy. Everything that is a carbohydrate that we eat breaks down into what's called the glucose molecule. If you know any diabetics, you know this very well. And that glucose is metabolized and provides energy to the brain and body almost instantly. So when we eat carbohydrates, for example, we get about 1 to 2 hours of energy out of a carbohydrate type of food, like a piece of bread, right, or a banana. Depending on how simple or complex that carbohydrate is that determines how much energy we have and how much energy we get from that carbohydrate source. For example, a soda is a very simple molecule chain. It breaks down very quickly and gets into the bloodstream right away. You're only going to get about an hour or so from a can of soda, hence the spike and the drop in energy. Whereas a more complex carbohydrate, the reason it's called more complex, like a sweet potato or whole grain bread, is that it's a longer molecule chain and it takes a little bit longer to break down into the bloodstream. It's got more fiber typically. And so that is going to give you about 2 hours of energy. Fats and proteins, on the other hand, are going to give you about 3 to 4 hours of sustained energy. So you can see where we would start to need all of those macronutrients in order to give ourselves the energy that we need to get through the day. Here's the kicker. You see that brain on the right side of your image, or on your slide. Our brain is the CEO of our body. And you might be surprised to learn that our brain requires 20 to 30% of our daily energy intake. So think about everything that you've eaten today so far. 20 to 30% of our daily energy intake goes straight to brain function. Our brain is a glucose glutton. And when it's not being fed what it needs, even within the matter of hours, other areas of the body are impacted. Our brain is going to get our energy regardless whether we like it or not. And it's going to look for other sources of energy if we aren't feeding it what it needs, either not enough calories or nothing at all, maybe skipping a meal. And when the brain doesn't get what it needs, it impacts our metabolism. It could impact our muscle mass. It could go to muscle availability, break that down to provide energy to the brain. It could impact our energy, our cognitive function, even our immune system and our hormone function. our brain simply needs food. It needs carbohydrates in particular. Carbohydrates are not the enemy when it comes to healthy cognitive function. So remember, we talked about our three parts of the brain in our first webinar and how that lizard brain, that reptile brain, and that limbic brain work together to bring about that stress response. And that we have that new part of the brain, the high performance hub, that really makes us humans, critical thinking, rational decision making, etc. Much like our brain reacts to stress with cognitive impairment. Remember, I told you that 30% of the blood flow pools to the bottom of the brain. When we're stressed, we have cognitive impairment almost instantly. Just like that, when your body doesn't have enough fuel to perform at its best, it does throw us into a survival state. And any non-essential functions to life will then go by the wayside when we are not providing that energy to the brain. So, for example, if you're trying to survive off a handful of almonds and 6 hours later you're sitting in a student or parent meeting, and you're wondering why you're not able to focus and think straight, or maybe you're trying to engage in a conversation with a friend, that is non-essential compared to, your brain having energy and living, your heart beating, oxygen circulating your bloodstream. Those are all essential functions to life. And so when your brain perceives that lack of food as a threat, it's going to go into survival mode, and you're going to have cognitive impairment as well as a lot of other impairments to your body, including a lack of energy and a lack of cognitive demand. So you're not going to be able to think as straight or focus. Better known as the term hangry, by the way. A lot of us can relate to feeling hangry, and that would be an example of cognitive impairment and emotional irregulation when we're not eating well. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make is we are wonderfully intricate and complicated machines. And all types of foods that we intake serve a purpose. So here's the mindset shift I want to propose. Look at your food in terms of this. Is this food worthy of me or not? Is it going to give me the energy I need to perform at my best or not? And if it's not, we're going to have to make a little shift in what we're choosing to eat. Is it going to give me the energy to get through this day and these really difficult times? Is it going to give me, am I going to be able to even thrive through what I'm going through right now? And the right foods will help you thrive through, not just get by, right? So the big mindset shift and the question I would write down for yourself if you're taking notes is this food worthy of me or not? It's a good question to ask yourself when you're thinking about your energy intake. Another way that I want you to look at this, and this is a call to action. What if you ate every 3 to 4 hours and you tried to match your energy supply with your energy demands? So if your energy supply is what you're taking in and eating, and your energy demands is what you actually need to get through the day, what we're trying to do is balance out supply and demand here, right? One of the best ways to do this is to eat often, every 3 to 4 hours. So when would demand be high? Getting out of bed, getting ready for work in the morning, energy is a little higher, you're moving around, exercising, maybe getting off work, maybe walking the dog, running errands, whatever it is. And you can start to see that there's a bit of a pattern here. And if you notice, that pattern somewhat mimics the oscillation pattern that we can all relate to, because we've talked about this oscillation strategy in previous webinars. So what if you tried to think about, this is another mindset shift proposal, what if you tried to think about your day in terms of supply and demand, and giving your body what it needed to face the demands that it needed, and fluctuating that way? Eating often and lighter is scientifically validated time and time again to be one of the best strategies that you can implement to regulate your energy, to allow your brain to show up at its best and be cognitively function at its best. And it's actually correlated with longevity of life, lower risk for disease, and more regular weight maintenance. And so this is one strategy that has stood the test of time, so to speak, eating light and eating often. I don't mean perfectly portioned meals spaced out during the day. I'm talking matching energy supply with demand. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, maybe a snack, maybe 2 snacks in there, something like that. So that's kind of one strategy that I would kind of highly recommend. And you can see that it doesn't take a whole lot of shifting around your eating habits. We're not asking you to eat a significantly more amount of food or less amount of food. It's just playing with when you're taking that energy in. Because a lot of times what happens is maybe we have too much at one meal and then we feel overfull and we don't eat for quite some time. We have that impact on the brain, that cognitive impairment occurs. Or on the flip side, we skip a meal. Again, we get hangry. And what do we crave during those times when we're really, really hungry and energy and blood sugar is really low? Instinctively, we crave simple carbohydrates because, again, we're very complicated, wonderfully made machines. And your brain instinctually is going to crave sugar in times when you're not feeding it any food at all or a low amount of food. Or if you're just eating carbohydrates all throughout the day, and again, you only get 1 to 2 hours at a time, you're going to start to see that energy fluctuating quite a bit, right? In the times like that. So eat every 3 to 4 hours, try to match your energy supply with your demand. Let me give you an example. This is something that I, with permission, borrowed from one of my clients. This was a supply demand chart she created for me. And this is literally, something she wrote down, which I thought was hysterical. And you can see how her energy is all over the place and her intake is very irregular. I think she was a little liberal with how high she said her energy was at lunch and dinner. But you can see that another thing that came with this was she was very reactive to her day rather than being responsive to her day. One of the things that this supply demand principle requires is that we're a little bit more responsive and intentional about our food choices. We have to be in order to match supply with demand because we have to be thinking about what's going on in our day and how can I meet the needs of my day. And so when we started to work together, get a little bit more responsive versus reactive to it and plan ahead a little bit more, she started to better match her supply and demand. And you could see that her energy was regulated quite a bit. And she had better amounts of energy, more sustained throughout her day when she made those changes. So one exercise I would challenge you to implement is draw your own energy supply demand chart. What does it look like right now? Are you more reactive or more responsive when it comes to your eating choices? And how are you thinking about food? What's the mindset that you're bringing to the table about food when you're making those choices? So what I'm going to do now is run you through a couple of mindfulness strategies that have worked with a lot of our clients. I'm not suggesting you implement all of these right now. There's going to be several of these strategies I'm going to introduce to you. A couple of people have asked me, well, this is all fine and dandy, but what do we eat during this time? What is it that we actually eat? And so that's one of the first strategies that I would suggest. When it comes to all the misinformation out there on the internet, again, another thing that has stood the test of time is the Harvard plate. The Harvard plate is one of the most consistently recommended ways of eating and a way to build your plate. So if you're looking for a strategy to shift your eating habits, why don't you try for a day trying to match this particular Harvard plate, which again balances all of these macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and creates a plate that better aligns with what our body and our brain actually need. So the Harvard plate is half of your plate being vegetables and fruit, a quarter of your plate being a whole grain source of food. The more complex the carbohydrate, the better. And then a quarter of your plate being healthy proteins and fats. You can have a little bit of fat in there, of course, like from the eggs, the nuts, the seeds, et cetera. You'll get that naturally. And it doesn't have to look exactly like this. This is just a way for you to think about ratios, for example, in your food choices. Now, your snacks are going to be a shrunken version of this. Snacks will be about 100 to 150 calories, but they're still going to be balanced, like an apple and peanut butter, a cheese stick and an orange, hummus and pita chips. Those are good, strategies to combine macronutrients for a smaller version of this Harvard plate. So this is one strategy you can use to implement. Another one that you can choose is using a portion control system. Now, I want to stop here for a second and just point one thing out. When it comes to food, there are certain aspects of food and strategies that could be a bit more triggering than others. Sometimes thinking about portions, sometimes thinking about calories really stresses people out. It triggers them, bad memories, bad relationships with food. If any of this feels triggering for you, don't do it. If it's easier to just think about, is this food worthy of me or not? Or is this food going to provide me the energy I need or not? Keep it as simple as that. I've seen success with every single one of these strategies individually with different types of personalities and people. So I want to make sure that I'm providing a plethora of them. But just to go back to it, the portion control made easy graphic, I really, really like, because it is based on natural portion control systems that are built into the body. If you hold your hand up and take a look at it, you can see that you have a perfectly designed portion control system built into your body right now. For those of you with bigger hands, guess what? You get bigger portions. And lucky for you, the men on the call, you get 2 of each, which is nice. So example for the protein, for example, you would have the diameter and thickness of your palm would be a good portion of protein for you for a meal, a breakfast, lunch, or a dinner. Vegetables would be a fist. Carbohydrates like a starch, like a noodle, bread, pasta would be a cupped hand. And by the way, this is where a lot of people tend to overdo it, is in that carbohydrate portion. So this is a good one to pay attention to. And then a thumb would be a healthy source of fat. Peanut butter, avocado, nuts, seeds, although I love avocado and I strongly disagree that a thumb amount is enough. So I challenge that one just because I love avocado so much. And by the way, of course, these portions can be adjusted up and down. If I'm going to go out for a run, I'm probably going to want a little bit more carbohydrate before or after that meal, right? And if I'm going to be sitting at a computer all day, I'll probably want a little bit more protein and vegetables. So there's some flux here. This is not all stringent and strict. And at the bottom right there, if you see graphic courtesy of Precision Nutrition, I highly recommend that website, Precision Nutrition, to answer a lot of questions and clear up a lot of myths. It's a website that is not driven by profit. It's a bunch of nerdy scientists and dietitians that got together and put together a certification program for people like myself, and helps us understand performance nutrition. There's a lot of great articles and great science in there. So if there's anything you're confused about, or you see some sort of new fad diet pop up on the internet, go to that website and it'll help you understand it a little bit better. So here's another strategy that you can use to be more mindful about your eating patterns, and that's the hunger scale. Again, not all of these work for everybody, but one of these might land for you. The hunger scale is exactly what it is, trying to be more mindful of hunger cues and get to know who you are when you're really hungry at a 1, when you're so full you feel sick at a 10, and challenging yourself to try to stay throughout the day between 4 and 6. If you notice, this one aligns a little bit with that supply demand, that sense of balance and oscillation that comes with eating regularly and eating a little bit more lightly. So a lot of people like this one. I will say this one's a bit challenging if you're facing a lot of stress, because sometimes hunger cues can get mistaken for stress. And so you have to be quite aware and track pretty closely for a couple of days those hunger cues and see if you can see any patterns in there between your emotional well-being, how you're doing, and those hunger cues. Everybody's different. Some people stop eating altogether when they're feeling really stressed and overwhelmed. And some people go straight to the kitchen for those comfort foods. We're all different in that way. So this is a really good strategy to get to know who you are when you're hungry or you think you're hungry. And then one other thing I wanted to touch on, because I know it's on the minds of a lot of people on this call, is, well, what about weight loss? What is really the most sustainable way and safest way to lose weight? But that's probably not. Some of you are probably thinking, what's the quickest way to lose weight? And I'm not going to give you the answer to that. The best thing that you can think about is, what is the most sustainable, most permanent way that I can lose weight? And when I say weight, I'm referring to fat loss. There's not a lot of people that I meet that tell me they want to lose a bunch of muscle and keep their fat. So if you do have an excessive amount of body fat that you're interested in losing, the strategy that we use with our clients is very much in line with what you're seeing here, is a broader perspective on food. For us, there is no off-limits food, and there shouldn't be for you either. There's foods that we should eat more of, and there's foods that we should eat less of. People tend, this is a general thing, tend to gain and lose weight by excessively eating either simple carbohydrates or a lot of processed foods with a lot of trans fats. And so those are things we want to eat a little bit less of, but there's nothing that's necessarily off limits. However, when it comes to weight loss, to think a little bit more broadly about it, if it takes a deficit of 3,500 calories to lose 1 pound of fat, which it does, a deficit of 3,500 calories to lose 1 pound of fat. So my math teachers on here, do the math. We would need a deficit of 500 calories per day to lose a pound of fat per week, right? What if we didn't just cut 500 calories out of our day? What if we trimmed a little bit of our calories? Let's say 250 calories. That would be replacing 1 serving of rice with a serving of salad, and maybe taking half of the peanut butter you were going to put on your bagel, and that would be your 250. And then what if we increased our energy expenditure on the other side and burned an extra 250 calories per day? Maybe a 10-minute walk in the morning and a 10-minute walk in the evening, and during lunch we did a couple sets of squats. And now you can see how net deficit would be 500 calories a day by burning a little more and trimming a little. And that's our approach to fat loss when we're talking about fat loss. So just something for you to think about if you are interested in that fat loss journey is, how can I expend more energy and just take trimmings? Remember, too small to fail, just trimming off of my regular intake, as opposed to, I'm just going to stop eating carbohydrates altogether, or I'm just going to skip a meal. Because again, we have to think about what's the impact that has on my cognitive function, my stress, my ability to show up at my best, and my long-term health. Because there is an impact in those areas when we get drastic with our eating habits. So a couple ways to make this happen. General advice: eat often, ensure your meals are balanced, choose foods that are worthy of you. Stay hydrated. Prioritize vegetables and proteins, because most of us Americans, we tend to undereat our protein and vegetables, mostly vegetables, particularly when you're thinking about body recomposition, AKA fat loss. And then try to reduce or minimize the sugary beverages and processed foods. Those are called the want foods, to about 20% of your total intake. How do we actually implement this? Well, here's a couple of examples. I'm going to send you again this PDF so you can look through these and pick a couple of rituals that might be too small to fail, but just for a couple of them. Track your mood and food in detail once per week. See if you can identify any patterns. Challenge yourself to increase your energy output by 250 calories, just 1 day a week. Too small to fail. On your day off, pack healthy snacks for the week to minimize cravings. I'll tell you, on that very first one, one of my clients implemented that one. And that was the only thing we did for 4 weeks. And guess what? That was in July, and she is 40 pounds lighter right now. Her goal was fat loss. And it started with that too small to fail action. So consistency and intentionality pays off. So I'm going to stop for a second. Does anybody have any questions about nutrition before I move on to movement and exercise and sleep? And feel free to put them on the chat. I know what was the website I mentioned? I know there's a lot of questions. I'm writing it right now. performancenutrition.com. I know there's a lot of questions and confusion around this. There's a lot of diets that people recommend to you maybe that are a little bit more extreme. When it comes to dieting, I would ask yourself, is this something I can keep up for the rest of my life? It's a good question to ask yourself. And is it drastic enough to impact my energy? On day one of making changes in your nutrition, you should feel better, not worse. So if anybody's trying to promise you that, oh, it's only like this for a couple of weeks, you'll feel terrible and want to die, but then it'll be great. That's a little bit of a red flag. I would probably caution myself. Our body is very, very adaptable, and it will adapt to anything you throw at it, even if it's not necessarily good for your long-term health. So we'll go back to questions in a little bit, but I wanted to move on to movement and exercise. You've been sitting for about 30 minutes now, so you might be able to relate to the fact that that we can't understate how important it is to move our bodies regularly. How do you feel after sitting for I assume you're sitting, but if you have been sitting for the last 30 minutes, how do you feel physically? Take a quick inventory. How's your posture? Mine's terrible at the moment. How do you feel mentally, cognitively? You've just gone through an entire workday, and God bless you, you're on this webinar and you're wanting to learn, but you might feel a little tight, sore, maybe a little unfocused. As I'm talking, if it is possible for you, I want you to listen while I'm talking, but I want you to stand up and I want you to stretch and just move around a little bit while I'm talking. And take inventory after about a minute of how you feel, how much more energy you have, how much more focused you are. Maybe even your mood shifts a little bit. So I want you to take inventory of that. You probably know from experience that movement and exercise has a pretty significant impact on your body. But did you know just how much? The World Health Organization has recently indicated that sedentary lifestyle is the fourth leading risk factor for death now. Inactivity is the fourth leading risk factor behind high blood pressure, diabetes, and smoking. So sitting has a pretty significant impact on us. And even like I said, just in this past 30 minutes, a lot of different changes have happened to the body. When we sit for too long, we have significant cognitive impairment that comes from that. When we sit for about 2 hours or more, hour and a half to 2 hours or more, we start to see cognitive impairment come into play. And we also have blood that pools into the bottom of our booty, really pools into our legs, and we have reduced blood flow to the brain because of that. So the reason I asked you to get up and move is because I wanted to change that direction of blood flow and bring it back where it belongs, to the brain. When we move more often, it's not just good for our physical body. So again, getting away from those binary mindsets around food and exercise. We're not just doing it to look good. It actually has impact on our cognition to move more often and to regularly exercise. In fact, the American Council on Exercise did a study that found a 70% improvement in decision-making of people who were moved often and were regular exercisers compared to their sedentary peers. There's so much positive impact that movement and exercise can have on the brain and the body. For example, did you know that regular weight training, strength training, increases the size of our hippocampus by as much as 15%? That's incredible growth. Physically, your brain changes its structure when you're exercising regularly. Exercise improves bone density. We can reverse DEXA scans. It encourages neurogenesis, or the creation of new neurons, despite your age, by the way. That wasn't a factor. So at any age, you can increase the amount of neurons in the brain through regular exercise. There's improvements in performance, decision-making, focus, less risk for brain diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia, less risk of depression, anxiety decreases as well, decreased back, joint, neck pain, longevity of life, you name it. There's a lot of different benefits. I don't really need to explain that to you because you probably already knew that there was significant impact to movement and exercise. The question I have for you is, how often are you actually doing that? How often are you actually getting up and moving around these days? And how often are you exercising, if at all? So when and if you have time to make that supply-demand chart, I would ask you to overlay onto it, and this is again my client that gave me permission to show you this, is overlay on that your movement patterns for the day and what that looks like. So for example, for her, she rolled out of bed, jumped on the computer, and she was on it all day. Back pain, joint pain, very low energy, etc. So what happens when you make those shifts that she made, what she started to implement, and not every day, by the way, on the 30 minutes, this was once a week for her, but this is what changed in her energy when she started to move around a little bit more often. So one of the questions I would have for you is draw this pattern for yourself, see where you're at now, and how can you brainstorm or strategize ways to get up and move more often through your day? And if you can you implement exercise into that routine as well? A very interesting bit of study and news that you might find intriguing. They've recently found out in the past 10 years or so that your body can't distinguish whether or not you've done your exercise all in 1 hour or you piecemeal it throughout the day. They call it microbursts of exercise. So what if you brainstormed ways to integrate microbursts, a set of squats here, a plank there, maybe you got a band and you just did band pull aparts sitting at your computer if you're still doing online learning, which I believe you all are. What if you got up and down out of your chair once an hour, set an alarm to do that? Even if you were still instructing, just everybody stop and took a movement break. These are ways that you can strategize implementing movement and exercise into your day. And again, at the end of the day, you could have technically done an hour's worth of exercise and just sparsed it out through the day. So we really want to shift our mindset about what is possible when it comes to movement and exercise rather than where you're inhibited. So some strategies around movement and exercise. Moved often. Again, going back to this oscillation pattern, it transcends every part of our life, if you haven't noticed yet. And the same goes for movement and exercise. We are at our best, hands down, when we moved often, every 90 to 120 minutes. So what if we set those alarms? What if we were strategic? If you're lucky enough to have a watch that tells you to get up and move, listen to it. Right? Get up and move every 90 to 120 minutes. Maybe do a little microburst of activity at that time. Exercise regularly to the best of your ability and your schedule. But remember, any movement is good movement. Any exercise routine that you enjoy is the right one for you. Again, there's a lot of misinformation out there about what you should be doing for exercise. Should you be lifting heavy weight or lightweight? Should you be running? Should you be doing the Peloton? Should you be doing, yoga? Here's the thing. Anything, any movement, any exercise is good. So pick at first what you enjoy, because that's going to be the most sustainable thing. But I will tell you, open your mindset a little bit to what's out there. I'll give you a good example. I have a client who started, she's a superintendent, by the way. She would give me full permission to share this with you. What we did was she started with trying to get one swim in her neighborhood pool once a week when we started. She wanted to get more movement into her day. She started getting up every hour or two and standing and working from a standing tall desk, and then going back to sitting. So that was another strategy we implemented. But she just started with that one swim. Well, when it got cold, she kind of ran out of ideas on what to do. And so we went back to the drawing board and we rethought what it meant for her to check off and be successful with her exercise. And we decided that any movement was good movement for 20 minutes. So she was going to try 3 times a week to just move her body for 20 minutes. That actually opened a lot of doors to things she had never tried before. I've put some apps down here at the bottom of this, these suggestions. These are a couple that I recommend to people all the time because they're so great. And this particular superintendent actually got really, really into yoga and had never thought about yoga before. And now she does yoga probably 3 times a week, and she walks the other 2 until it gets warm again, and then she's going to swim. So she's really broadened her mindset about what it means to move. She also put a band at her desk, and now she does some band work in between meetings and calls. So open your mind a little bit to the possibilities. Another example in here, suggestion, is keep it varied. I want to point out that general adaptation syndrome. That's actually why the reason I put that on there is the general adaptation syndrome is a phenomenon in the body where our body will adapt to whatever we throw at it. And so, for example, if you start to walk and you've been sedentary for quite some time, it's going to be a lot of discomfort when you first start walking, maybe a mile or 2 at a time. Heart rate's going to get elevated. It's going to be a little difficult. You'll be fatigued. But after a couple of weeks, thanks to this general adaptation syndrome, things are going to get a little bit easier. And so now it's time to spice it up. Either try a faster walk, a longer walk, maybe try a band or some sort of body weight stuff. And that's what I mean by keep it varied. Be open to trying new things. The Johnson & Johnson 7-minute workout app is fantastic. And yes, it really is only a 7-minute workout if you want it. And it's a really, really great one that's actually very smart. It learns what you like and what you don't and starts to customize workouts for you too along the way. And it's free. All of these are free apps, by the way. And then how do we make this a little bit more micro? Set a timer to get up and move every hour. Exercise 2 days a week, Mondays and Thursdays for 20 minutes. There's a lot of different options in here to make this a little bit more micro and a little bit more too small to fail, right? Oh, and then I put the apps in there too, which is perfect. And by the way, the premium version of that Down Dog Yoga app is free for educators through June 2021. So if you contact your site admin, I think you should be able to get access to that. I think it's a code or something you have to put in. So let me stop for just a quick second and see if you have any questions about exercise and movement. The reason I've kept it so broad is because I want to make sure that we're looking, again, just like we're looking at food, with a broader perspective on how it impacts our energy and our cognition. I want to look at movement and exercise the same way. How does it impact the way that we feel? How does it impact our ability to show up at our best? And then from there, how do we look at ways that we can integrate movement and exercise into our day that aren't going to seem like we're doing so much more, that it's a lofty goal that we have to accomplish? So what are some small things that we can integrate? Any movement is good movement. Any exercise is good exercise, even if it's just a set at a time. So I'm trying to broaden the mindset here about what's possible. So our final topic is going to be around sleep. 10,000 steps is a good goal, but let me tell you, it depends where you start. And that's a great question. If you're starting, if you regularly have 2,000 steps as a kind of average for yourself right now during the day, then anything above that is a successful goal. But yeah, 10,000 steps is good. It's just not always realistic for everybody. So I would give yourself a little bit of grace. And I'm answering a question on the chat for those who haven't seen it. Is 10,000 steps a good goal? So for some of my clients, we set a goal of 5,000 steps a day if they've really been truly very sedentary and haven't been able to get a lot of movement in because of this tight schedule you're all on right now. And so maybe you set a goal like 8,000 steps and consider that success. I want you to stop and think about what would success look like to me? Not necessarily what it looks like to everybody else. What would it look like to me for this week in particular? For some days, To be honest with you, to answer your question, for some days, a successful day for me is getting in 5,000 steps. When I've got a slam day, I consider it a success if I stand up and stretch every hour or so. And so I really want to shift my definition of success based on the day and what demands are facing me for that. That being said, I always have the broader goal of moving as often as I can. So I hope that answers your question. So getting into the sleep, again, if I was to poll you, this entire group, my guess is that if I asked you, how many of you get 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep per night? My guess is that we would mirror the national average, which is only 27% of the US population report getting enough sleep. And actually, globally, it's only 35%. So it's really not a whole lot of sleep. Oh, good job. Somebody said me, I get 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. We're all very jealous. And listen, before I even start talking about sleep, if you have a new baby, just ride the wave. This one's not for you right now. So hang in there. It will get better. For the rest of us who have a little bit more control over our sleep habits, we're going to be talking about this. What's very exciting is that we're still learning a lot about sleep. There's so much we don't know. Scientists are still unpacking things and learning new things. And actually, only in the past probably decade or so did we realize just how active our brain is at night. We thought it kind of went into a low power mode and rested with us during the night. That is not true. Actually, the brain activity is quite high, just in a different way. Every stage of sleep plays a different role in our brain health and our body health. So I want to give you some cool fun facts from sort of the emerging research around sleep. For example, they have realized recently that stage 1 sleep, that light sleep or REM sleep, is correlated with us working through relationship and emotional issues that we're facing during the day. We actually work through those and try to problem solve them during stage 1, which could explain why some of our dreams are really wacky. In stage 2 sleep, we're rolling over and reproducing movement patterns that we're trying to learn. So if you're trying to teach somebody how to ride a bike and they go to bed that night, in their stage 2 sleep, they're actually repeating that movement process over and over and over to make it more sticky. It's very fascinating. And then in stages 3 and 4, that deep restorative sleep, which arguably is the most important stage, there's so much going on. We work through a lot of problems that we're not able to figure out in our waking state. We do a lot of pattern matching. Very important, we flush out neural trash or waste product as a byproduct of thinking critically and being high-performing people. We have a lot of neural trash in our brain and it flushes out at night. And there's a lot of repair of muscle and brain tissue and renewal of our energy during that stage 3 sleep. In fact, there's a fantastic TED Talk on this neural trash flushing thing, this phenomenon, and how it's related to our brain health and certain brain diseases. It's really fascinating. If you Google TED Talk, dishwasher, brain sleep, I promise you'll find it. And it's a fascinating TED Talk. Highly recommend it. My point is, there's a lot that's going on during our sleep, and there's a reason we need it. In fact, I can't remember the theorist or the scientist's name, but the guy who invented the periodic table, he actually came up with it in his sleep. And my guess would be it was during stage 3 sleep. So very important you get your sleep. You never know when you're going to invent the next periodic table. What is the impact of poor sleep on us? Well, there's a significant impact. 1 night of sleep loss decreases our cognitive power by 30%, just 1 night. And 2 weeks of chronic sleep deprivation, which they consider 5 to 6 hours of sleep loss or sleep per night, it has the same cognitive impairment on us as showing up to work after drinking 2 alcoholic beverages. So it's kind of like showing up to work buzzed in terms of our cognitive performance. We're 3 times more likely to get sick. And we have dramatically decreased decision-making skills, empathy, emotional regulation, and mood regulation. So what do we need? We need 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep per night to be at our best. And you can't argue with that because there have been literally hundreds and hundreds of studies that have all validated the same amount, 7 to 9 hours. 99% of the global population falls within that range. Only 1% of the global population requires less than 7 hours or more than 9, just 1%. Somebody, just to interrupt myself, somebody asked what's the name of that app. I think they're referring to the Down Dog app, the yoga app. If not, it's the Johnson & Johnson 7-minute workout app or fitness blender. And there's a copy of this slide deck that will come to you after the talk, or that you can access after the talk on the main TUDS page. So if you forget any of this stuff, you can access it there. The name of the TED Talk, if you Google, I think it's called One Good Reason to Get a Good Night's Sleep or Another Reason to Get a Good Night's Sleep. But if you Google TED Talk dishwasher sleep, it will come up. Yeah, for what it's worth, it will come up. So we need 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. That's great, but how do we actually get 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night? That's the question. Let me see if I can advance my slide really quick. Seems to be stuck. Hang one second. So there's a couple of things. Oh, well, yeah, there it goes. Sorry, a little technology issue. So there's a couple of things we can do. 2 things I've noticed with a lot of my clients. Sometimes we overindulge in caffeine a little bit. I am just as guilty as the next person on this one. So I'm not saying to avoid caffeine, but I am saying that caffeine does have a significant impact on our sleep health. So you might want to consider how much of it you are taking in, particularly in the afternoon. I would try to minimize or eliminate caffeine after 2 p.m. if possible. And the reason is caffeine has a half-life of 6 hours. So a small cup of coffee at 8 a.m. is still in your body, traces of it when you're going to sleep at night. So imagine the cumulative effect of a large cup of coffee plus a second large cup of coffee plus the 4 p.m. cup of coffee. And you can see how that might disrupt our sleep patterns a little bit. And then alcohol is also, again, I'm a Tito's girl. I'm not against alcohol in any way, shape, or form, but I will put it out there that alcohol has a significant impact on our sleep health. We might use it to fall asleep, but we actually bypass stages 1 and 2 and go into deep sleep, and it really disrupts the cycle. And not to mention it's a diuretic, so we get up in the middle of the night and use the bathroom, which also disrupts the sleep cycle. So, and of course, there's no nutritional value to alcohol. So I would challenge you to maybe keep your alcohol consumption to the weekends if you do have sleep issues, or play with caffeine. I would choose one or the other at first and see if that impacts your sleep health. But a couple of other kind of overarching goals for sleep. Number 1, make sure your sleep environment is set up. Is it dark? Is it cool? Do you have a good pillow? Do you have a white noise machine? Things like that. What is your routine around going to sleep? Is it lights are all on and the TV's on and then you shut it all off and you stare at a screen for 30 minutes? Well, that could have something to do with your sleep health. Even if you have one of those low light or yellow light screens, because, a lot of people say that blue light emission keeps you up. That is true, but it's also the content of what you're reading. So if you're watching Netflix on your screen or checking your work email and answering work emails, that's going to stir up the prefrontal cortex and it's going to keep you awake. It's going to signal to your brain that it's not time for sleep. So 30 minutes before bed, I would give yourself a signal that it's time by shutting down devices. Minimize alcohol, minimize caffeine. Again, change your mindset about sleep. What is your story about sleep? That you don't need it? That you're one of the 1%? That you'll sleep when you're dead? I've heard that before. Is there a mindset about sleep? Oh, I don't have time for that. I'm too busy. Whatever it might be, I want you to sort of dive in and explore what's the story you're telling yourself about why you can't prioritize your sleep habits, and what are some small things that you could do to shift that mindset. So a couple of action items to make it too small to fail. Set reminders to turn off all screens 2 days a week. See if that has an impact on how easily you fall asleep and stay asleep. Make it cool and dark, like I said. Try the alcohol or caffeine thing. maybe, and this works very well for a lot of people, you meditate or breathe deeply 3 minutes before bed twice a week, or maybe you journal and offload a lot of what's on your mind and on your heart. Maybe you make a to-do list for the next day, or you write down your reflections or your worries or any thoughts that you have. Maybe that will help you fall asleep better. Again, dip your toe in the water of a couple of these things and see if they work for you. So I'm going to give you just a minute here to write down any reflections you may have around this body pathway. Which of these 3 components do you think would be the area that you're probably most struggling? Nutrition, movement, exercise, that's 1, or sleep. What is the obstacle there that most gets in the way for you? And how can we change our story about that? How can we shift your mindset? And what's one small way you can move in the right direction? I would jot down any ahas you might have had in the past hour, any realizations about yourself, any bits of information you don't want to forget. That way you can revisit them later, maybe before bed, instead of looking at a screen. The question I got is, can you make up sleep on the weekends? Yes and no. You can certainly, and should if you can, make up sleep on the weekends, but it still won't solve the issue of cognitive impairment during the week when you're a little bit at a deficit. But naps and extra sleep on the weekend can certainly catch you up in a few ways in terms of restoring your energy. It just can't necessarily help with that cognitive impact that it has on you on a day-to-day basis. So to the best of your ability, I would try to prioritize your sleep as best you can. This is a game changer too. This is a chicken and egg scenario for a lot of people of, does my poor sleep habits, do they impact my nutrition habits? Do they impact my exercise ability? Because I can't wake up in the morning and get the exercise because I'm tired. So it would be up to you to really reflect here and say, where's that area I should be focusing on first? Maybe it is just getting a good night's sleep, and that gives you the energy to focus in other areas. Somebody says, how much time should we give between your last meal and sleeping? There's actually not a whole lot of science to validate that there's a window you should not eat after dinner. But I think Oprah came up with the whole don't eat after 6 p.m. There is no science to support that. I'm not quite sure where she got that. That being said, if you are going to eat pretty close to bedtime, if I were you, I would prioritize protein in that meal because it can only help in the restorative process of your sleep patterns. So if I were you, that's probably what I would do. I wouldn't necessarily eat a really carbohydrate rich meal right before bed, like a big bowl of ice cream. It won't sit well. And it doesn't have the same benefits that protein would during your sleep. I think I have another question here. Any supplement or vitamin recommendations? That I would actually take up with your doctor. I'm very hesitant to recommend supplements to people. I will tell you 2 things. Number 1, go to Precision Nutrition for information on supplements that are more beneficial or less beneficial to people in general, and which brands are really kind of safe and trusted. I also will point out that a lot of people don't know that they have a vitamin D deficiency. So before you run and take a vitamin D supplement, I would actually run and get a blood panel and see where you might be deficient. I will also say that a lot of women, we number 1 killer of women is heart disease. And so if you don't think you're getting in the right amount of omega-3 fatty acids, I would definitely consider that supplement, but I would take it up with your doctor first. I personally take one daily because I don't like cold water fish. I like warm water fish that doesn't have a high amount of omega-3s. I hope you found this information valuable. I know it's kind of an overarching view of the body pathway, but I do hope you were able to take a couple of things from it. One more quick thing before we go. Our next webinar is March 1st and is on our mental well-being, our mind pathway now we're going to jump into, and we're going to be talking about focus and perspective. So I kept saying that word mindset today, and that is really what we're going to dive into next time. So you all have a wonderful night. Thank you for joining us. I will see you on March 1st. Have an awesome night. Take care.